The scorching sun beat down on Whispering Pines like God's own judgment, the day Willa Hargrove dragged herself home, fever broken but spirit intact, while 23 others lay cold in the ground. Her auburn hair hung limp against her hollow cheeks as she stumbled through the town's dusty main street, legs wobbling with each step. The townsfolk crossed themselves and whispered behind trembling hands. Nobody survived the red fever, nobody except Willa. It was 1878, and the American frontier had little patience for mysteries it couldn't explain. The railroad had reached their corner of Colorado territory just 3 years prior, bringing with it progress, prosperity, and now suspicion. Which, Mrs. Patterson hissed, pulling her children behind her skirts as Willa passed. Devil's own magic keeping her blood running while good Christian folk lie dead. Willa pretended not to hear, though each word sliced deeper than the fever ever had. She'd been the schoolteacher here for 5 years, respected if not beloved. Now, returning from her sister's farm where the fever had ravaged everyone but her, she found herself transformed from neighbor to nightmare overnight. The mercantile's bell jingled as she approached, but old Mr. Henderson flipped the sign to closed before she could reach the door. Her pantry at home was empty. She'd been gone nearly 3 weeks, but it seemed she would go hungry today. She swallowed hard against the tightness in her throat and turned toward her small cottage at the edge of town. "Miss Hargrove," the deep voice startled her. Yorick Miller stood beside the hitching post, tall and lean in his worn leather vest and dusty boots. She'd seen him around town since he'd arrived last autumn to work at the Blackstone Ranch, but they'd never exchanged more than passing pleasantries. He was a quiet man, kept to himself mostly, with eyes the color of a stormy sky and a face weathered by sun and solitude. "Mr. Miller," she acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her sickly appearance. "Heard you were back." He shifted, uncomfortable with conversation like most men who spent more time with cattle than people. "Folks are talking nonsense." "Folks often do," she replied, too tired to defend herself. He nodded toward the bundle in his arms she hadn't noticed. "Thought you might need provisions." Henderson's being a fool. Willa stared at the package wrapped in brown paper. Inside would be flour, coffee, maybe some salt pork, simple necessities that had suddenly become unreachable luxuries. Her pride warred with her empty stomach. "Why?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "You hardly know me." Yorick's eyes met hers directly, unafraid. "My mother survived cholera when half our wagon train died. Folks called her cursed too. She wasn't, just stronger than most." He held out the bundle. "Take it, no strings." Tears threatened, but Willa blinked them back. She reached for the package, her fingertips brushing his calloused hand. "Thank you." He tipped his hat and turned to go. "Mr. Miller," she called after him. "Would you like some coffee? I can at least offer that much." He paused, considering. Another time, perhaps, got to get back to the ranch. Something passed across his face, hesitation, maybe regret. "Be careful, Miss Hargrove. People fear what they don't understand." "And what about you, Mr. Miller? Do you fear me too?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've seen too much of this world to fear a woman who fought death and won." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Willa standing in the street clutching her groceries, watching until his silhouette disappeared against the distant mountains. She didn't know then that Yorick Miller would become her only ally in a town turning against her. She didn't know that his simple act of kindness would be the first thread in a tapestry of salvation neither of them could yet imagine. All she knew was that for the first time since waking from the fever, she felt something other than despair, a tiny flicker of hope that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she feared. The next morning, Willa woke to find a dead crow on her doorstep, its wings spread in an unnatural position. This wasn't nature's doing. Someone had placed it there deliberately. Her stomach clenched as she used a shovel to remove the poor creature, burying it beneath her struggling rosebush. She dressed carefully in her best navy skirt and white blouse. Sunday service would be starting in an hour, and she refused to give the town further reason to shun her by missing church. Perhaps if they saw her praying alongside them, their fears would ease. She was wrong. As Willa approached the white clapboard church, conversations hushed. Parents pulled children away from her path. Reverend Thomas paused in greeting parishioners, his welcoming smile faltering as he saw her approach. Miss Hargrove, he said stiffly, we did not expect you. I've never missed Sunday service, Reverend, she replied, clutching her Bible tighter. Not once in 5 years. Perhaps, given recent circumstances, a period of private reflection would be more appropriate, he suggested, his voice low. For everyone's comfort, heat rose to her cheeks. Are you asking me to leave God's house, Reverend? Several onlookers had stopped to watch this exchange, including Sheriff Palmer and the mayor's wife. I'm merely suggesting, let her in, Reverend, a voice interrupted. Yorick Miller stood at the edge of the churchyard, hat in hand. He'd shaved and wore a clean shirt, and string tie clearly his Sunday best, though it was still humble compared to the townsman's finery. Unless the Lord's changed his policy on welcoming all sinners alike. The Reverend looked between them, clearly struggling with the decision. Of course, all are welcome, he finally said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Willa entered, acutely aware of the empty space that formed around her in the pews. Only Mrs. Winters, the elderly widow who was half blind and partially deaf, sat within arm's reach, smiling vaguely in Willa's direction. To her surprise, Yorick slid into the pew beside her, nodding politely but saying nothing. She could smell the faint scent of soap and leather, could feel the solid warmth of him despite the inches between them. His presence was like a shield, and the whispers around them diminished somewhat. Reverend Thomas's sermon that day was on Exodus, the plagues of Egypt and God's judgment upon the unfaithful. The parallels were hardly subtle. When he spoke of unnatural occurrences and divine retribution, his gaze drifted repeatedly to where Willa sat. Why are you doing this? She whispered to Yorick while the congregation stood to sing a hymn. Doing what? He asked, his deep voice barely audible over the organ, standing by me. You're making yourself a target. His eyes remained fixed on the hymnal they shared. I don't much care what people think of me, Miss Hargrove. You should. You need to work and live here. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I've lived and worked in worse places with worse company. He turned a page in the hymnal. Besides, what kind of man would I be if I stood by while they crucify an innocent woman? The word crucify sent a chill through her. It didn't feel like an exaggeration. After the service, Yorick walked her home despite her protests. The townspeople watched from a distance, their faces a mixture of fear, disgust, and in some cases shame. I'll be fine, she insisted as they reached her cottage. You've done enough. I haven't done anything yet, he replied, gazing past her to the small building. Your woodpile's low. Winter's coming earlier up here than down in Texas. I'll manage, I've no doubt. His eyes returned to her face. Still, I've got tomorrow afternoon free. I'll bring my axe. She wanted to refuse to protect him from association with her, but self-preservation won out. The nights were already growing cold, and chopping wood with her still recovering strength would be difficult. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Yorick, he corrected. If we're going to scandalize the town together, we might as well use our Christian names. Despite everything, she found herself smiling. Willa then. Willa, he repeated, as though testing the feel of it on his tongue. He nodded, satisfied. I'll see you tomorrow. True to his word, Yorick arrived the next afternoon with an axe over his shoulder and determination in his stride. Willa had spent the morning attempting to salvage her small garden, which had been neglected during her absence. The cabbages were salvageable, but most everything else had withered or been eaten by rabbits. You've been busy, he observed, noting the freshly turned soil. Trying to save what I can before the first frost. She brushed dirt from her hands. Would you like some water before you start? He accepted the dipper she offered, drinking deeply. Willa tried not to notice the strong column of his throat as he swallowed, or the way his shirt stretched across broad shoulders as he handed the dipper back. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he almost smiled. How long have you been in Colorado? She asked as he surveyed the logs needing splitting. Since last September, came up from Texas with a cattle drive, decided to stay on at Blackstone's place. And before Texas, he positioned a log on the chopping block. Here and there, Missouri. Kansas for a spell, wherever the work was. The axe came down with precision, splitting the log cleanly. You've been here 5 years, they say. Yes, I came from Boston after my parents died. My sister was already out here with her husband. She paused, thinking of Margaret and her family, all in the ground now. I took the teaching position when the town was half its current size. You like teaching? Very much, or I did. She stared at her hands. I doubt they'll let me near the children now. Yorick split another log with controlled force. People's memories are shorter than they think. Give it time, perhaps. She wasn't convinced. What about you? Any family? He worked steadily as he spoke. Parents gone. Brother somewhere in California if he's still breathing. We're not close. So you're alone. By choice mostly. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. Freedom in it. And loneliness too, she said softly. He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing something he hadn't noticed before. Yes, he admitted. That too. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, him working steadily through the pile of logs while she prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. When she called him to eat, he washed up at the pump, the cold water turning his tanned hands red. You didn't have to feed me, he said, though he ate with the hearty appetite of a man who worked hard. Seems the least I can do. She sat across from him at her small table. Tell me about Texas. For the next hour, he spoke more than she guessed he normally did, describing the vast ranches and the cattle drives, the characters he'd met, and the storms he'd weathered. His voice was low and soothing, his stories painted with simple but vivid details. Willa found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. A knock at the door shattered their companionable moment. Sheriff Palmer stood on her doorstep, hat in hand but pistol visibly holstered at his hip. His eyes narrowed when he saw Yorick inside. Miller, he acknowledged tersely before turning to Willa. Miss Hargrove, there's been some complaints. What sort of complaints? She asked, heart sinking. Mrs. Patterson's youngest has taken ill. She's convinced it's your doing. Willa's hands clenched at her sides. That's absurd. I haven't been near her children. Said you looked at the boy yesterday after church. Said he woke up with a fever this morning. Half the children in town have sniffles this time of year, Yorick interjected, coming to stand beside Willa. You know that's not cause for accusations, Sheriff. Palmer's gaze hardened. Wasn't asking you, Miller. Best remember your place here. My place. Yorick's voice remained calm, but Willa could sense the tension in him. And what place would that be? A hired hand who'd be wise not to make enemies. The sheriff turned back to Willa. I'm not saying I believe in witchcraft, Miss Hargrove. I'm a reasonable man, but this town's on edge and I can't guarantee your safety if more children fall ill. Is that a threat, Sheriff? Willa asked quietly. It's a warning from someone who'd prefer to maintain order without incident. He replaced his hat. Mind how you go, Miss Hargrove. His eyes flicked to Yorick. Both of you. After he left, Willa sat heavily in her chair, hands trembling slightly. It's happening faster than I thought. Yorick remained standing, looking out the window to ensure the sheriff had truly departed. We should consider options. She echoed. He turned to her, his expression grave. You need to leave Whispering Pines. This is my home. It's not anymore. His bluntness stung, but she couldn't deny the truth of it. Winter's coming. If you stay, things will only get worse. First dead animals on your doorstep, then rocks through your windows, then fire. Her blood chilled at his matter-of-fact prediction. You sound like you've seen this before. Once, something dark passed behind his eyes, didn't end well. Where would I go? She asked, the reality of her situation sinking in. I have some savings, but not enough to start over completely. Yorick paced the small room, thinking, Denver maybe, or further west. California's growing fast. Alone, the word hung between them, heavy with implication. He stopped pacing, his gaze finding hers. Something unspoken passed between them, possibility, perhaps, or simply shared understanding of impossibility. I have obligations at the ranch, he said finally. But I know people. Good people who could help you settle somewhere new. Disappointment flickered through her, though she knew his response was sensible. They barely knew each other. There was no reason for him to append his life for her. I appreciate that, she said, forcing a smile. But I need time to think. This is a lot to consider, he nodded, understanding. I should go, I've stayed too long as it is. At the door he paused. Lock this behind me, don't open it unless you're certain who's knocking. You make it sound like I'm at war. His expression was solemn. You are, Willa, you just didn't choose it. That night, Willa couldn't sleep. She paced her small cottage, considering her options. Leaving meant giving in to ignorance and superstition. Staying meant facing escalating danger. Neither choice felt right. She thought of Yorick, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness. She hardly knew him, yet he'd risked his position and reputation to stand beside her. Why? Was it merely principle or something more? A noise outside startled her from her thoughts. Something scraped against her window. Heart pounding, she peered through the curtains. Words had been painted across her window in something dark and dripping. Witch, it proclaimed in jagged letters. Below it, a crude drawing of a woman hanging from a tree. Willa stumbled back, bell rising in her throat. This was no children's prank. This was a promise. With trembling hands, she gathered her most important possessions, her parents' photographs, her teaching certificates, her mother's wedding ring. She stuffed them into a carpet bag along with a change of clothes and what little money she had saved. She couldn't stay here tonight, but where could she go? The answer came to her with surprising clarity. There was only one person in Whispering Pines who had shown her kindness. Only one place she might find temporary sanctuary. She slipped out her back door and into the darkness, praying she remembered the way to the Blackstone Ranch. The 3-mile walk felt interminable in the darkness. Every rustle in the underbrush, every distant owl call sent her heart racing. When she finally spotted the lights of the ranch house in the distance, her legs were trembling with exhaustion and fear. The bunkhouse stood separate from the main house, a long, low building where the ranch hands slept. A single lantern still burned in the window despite the late hour. Willa hesitated, suddenly aware of how improper her actions were. An unmarried woman appearing at a men's bunkhouse in the middle of the night, it would confirm every rumor about her wickedness. But the alternative was worse. She knocked softly on the door, praying it would be Yorick who answered. It was. His hair was tousled from sleep, his suspenders hanging at his sides over his union suit. Confusion gave way to alarm as he recognized her. Willa, what happened? He pulled her inside quickly, scanning the darkness behind her. I'm sorry, she whispered, conscious of the other men sleeping nearby. I didn't know where else to go. He led her to the far end of the bunkhouse, where a small area had been partitioned off to give him slightly more privacy than the other hands. A narrow cot, a trunk, and a small table with a book and the still burning lantern were his only possessions. Tell me, he said simply. She described the message on her window, the explicit threat. As she spoke, his expression hardened, jaw clenching tight. I shouldn't have left you alone, he muttered. You couldn't have known. I did know. I told you how this would go. He ran a hand through his hair. You can't go back there. I have nowhere else. You'll stay here tonight, he interrupted. I'll sleep outside your door. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's next. Yorick, I can't stay in the bunkhouse. If Mr. Blackstone found out, Blackstone's a fair man, better than most. He grabbed a blanket from his cot. But you're right that it wouldn't do either of us any favors to be found like this. At first light, I'll take you to the widow Carson's place. Mrs. Carson, from the millinery shop, he nodded. Her husband rode for Blackstone before he died. She lives outside town, keeps to herself mostly. She's no friend to gossips and superstition. Hope flickered within her. Do you think she'd take me in, for a few days at least? He spread the blanket on the floor beside his cot. Take the bed, try to sleep. I can't take your bed, you can and will. His tone brooked no argument. I've slept on worse than floorboards. Too exhausted to protest further, Willa sank onto his cot. It smelled of him leather and tobacco and something uniquely masculine. She should have felt scandalized to be in such an intimate setting with a man she barely knew, but instead, she felt only gratitude and a strange sense of security. Thank you, she whispered as he turned down the lantern. I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you. In the near darkness, she could just make out his silhouette as he settled on the floor beside the cot. Get some rest, Willa. Tomorrow's soon enough for figuring things out. She wanted to say more, to understand the enigma of this solitary cowboy who had become her unlikely champion. But exhaustion claimed her before she could form the words. Willa woke to urgent whispers. Dawn light filtered through the bunkhouse windows, and Yorick was speaking in low tones with another man at the door to his partitioned area. Looking for her, the other man was saying. Sheriff's got a posse together. A posse? Yorick's voice was tight with disbelief. For what crime? Patterson boy's worse, delirious with fever. Doc says it might be the same thing that took the others. That's disease, not witchcraft. Tell that to the mob forming in town. Mason overheard them at the saloon last night. They're talking about a trial. A lynching, you mean? Yorick's voice had turned cold. Thanks for the warning, Jake. Not a word about this to anyone. Course not, but you'd better move fast. Sheriff was headed this way when I left town. The door closed, and Yorick turned to find Willa sitting up, her face pale with fear. You heard, he said unnecessarily. She nodded, hands clutching the rough blanket. They're blaming me for the boy's illness. They're looking for someone to blame, and you're convenient. He began gathering items quickly, a canteen, jerky, ammunition for the rifle he pulled from beneath his cot. We need to leave, now, she echoed. He paused in his preparations, meeting her eyes directly. I'm not letting you face this alone. Yorick, you barely know me. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. He stuffed the supplies into a saddlebag. Get your things. We'll head north through the high country. I know places where we can lie low until this blows over. What about your job, your life here? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. What life? I'm a drifter, Willa, always have been. But that wasn't entirely true, she realized. In his actions, in his unwavering support, she saw a man with principles, with a moral center as solid as bedrock. That wasn't the mark of a drifter. That was the mark of a man who knew exactly who he was. Why? She asked simply. Why risk everything for me? He stopped his preparations, considering her question. Because it's right, he said finally. And because there's something about you, he broke off, shaking his head. We don't have time for this. Will you come with me or not? Put that way, there was really no choice at all. Yes. Within minutes, they had slipped out the back of the bunkhouse. Yorick led her to the stables where he quickly saddled 2 horses. Ever ridden before? He asked, adjusting the stirrups on a dappled mare. Not since I was a girl. She's gentle. Follow my lead and you'll be fine. They led the horses out through the back pasture, keeping the buildings between them and the main road. Only when they reached the tree line did they mount up and begin riding in earnest, heading toward the mountains that rose like sentinels to the north. Willa's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was leaving everything behind her home, her career, the life she'd built. Yet with each hoofbeat carrying her farther from whispering pines, she felt a weight lifting. She glanced at Yorick, riding tall and alert beside her, and for the first time since the fever, she felt truly safe. They rode hard through the morning, following game trails and creek beds, doubling back occasionally to confuse any pursuit. Yorick seemed to know the land intimately, navigating with confidence through increasingly rugged terrain. By midday, they had climbed high enough that the air had grown noticeably cooler. Aspens shimmered gold against the evergreens, their leaves whispering in the mountain breeze. In another circumstance, the beauty would have been breathtaking. We'll rest here, Yorick announced, dismounting beside a small stream. Horses need water, so do you. Willa slid from her saddle on trembling legs. The unaccustomed riding had left her sore and stiff. Yorick steadied her with a hand at her elbow, his touch gentle but impersonal. Thank you, she said, stretching carefully. Where are we headed? Old Trapper's cabin about 10 miles further up. Friend of mine uses it during hunting season. Should be empty now, and it's well stocked with provisions. She nodded, watching as he led the horses to drink. How long can we stay there? Few days, week at most. He glanced back at her. Long enough to decide our next move. Our next move. The words sent an unexpected warmth through her. Despite everything, she wasn't alone. What will happen to the Patterson boy? She asked quietly. If it's the red fever and he's strong, he might pull through. Yorick's expression softened. Like you did. And if he doesn't, then they'll have more reason to hunt you. He stated it plainly, not to frighten her, but because it was the truth. Either way, we need a plan that gets you far from Colorado territory. They rested for half an hour, sharing jerky and hard biscuits Yorick had packed. The simple meal tasted better than any fancy dinner Willa could remember, hunger and fresh air providing all the seasoning needed. As they prepared to ride again, a distant sound reached them, the baying of hounds. Yorick's head snapped up, his expression darkening. Damn. They're using tracking dogs. Fear clutched at Willa's throat. How far behind? Too close. He helped her quickly into the saddle. Ride ahead along the stream, I'll catch up. What are you going to do? His eyes met hers, determination evident. Buy us some time. Before she could protest, he'd slapped her horse's flank, sending it splashing upstream. Willa held on tightly, guiding the mare as best she could while Yorick's mount disappeared in the opposite direction. For nearly 20 minutes, she followed the stream upward, her worry growing with each passing moment. What if they caught him? What if he was hurt? The thought of Yorick facing a posse alone made her stomach clench with dread. Finally, she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She reined in, heart pounding, until Yorick's familiar silhouette appeared around the bend. Go, he called, not slowing. They're closer than I thought. They rode hard for another hour, climbing steadily into more difficult terrain. The horses were lathered and breathing heavily by the time a small cabin came into view, nestled against a granite outcropping and surrounded by dense pine forest. We made it, Yorick said, dismounting quickly. Inside, I'll tend to the horses. The cabin was simple but sturdy, one room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a single bed pushed against the far wall. Shelves held preserved food, coffee, and other basic supplies. A stack of firewood stood ready beside the hearth. Willa busied herself laying a fire while Yorick took the horses to a small lean-to behind the cabin. When he returned, his expression was grim. They'll find this place eventually, he said, securing the door. But the dogs will lose our scent in the stream, and I laid some false trails. Should buy us a day or two. What then? She asked, striking a match to the kindling. We keep moving. He shrugged off his coat. North maybe, into Wyoming territory, or west to Nevada. Just wandering forever. The fire caught, sending welcome warmth into the cooling cabin. That's no kind of life, Yorick. Better than a hanging. He sat heavily at the table. I'm open to better ideas. Willa joined him, her mind racing. What if we could prove I'm not a witch, that the fever was just nature taking its course? How? You survived when others didn't. That's all the proof they need. But it's happened before. Your mother survived cholera, he nodded slowly. True enough. There must be doctors, scientists who study these things, who understand that sometimes people simply resist disease. In Boston or New York maybe, not out here. Then perhaps that's where we should go. The idea took shape as she spoke. East, where there's more education, less superstition. Yorick considered this. It's a long journey, dangerous this time of year. Winter comes early in the mountains. More dangerous than staying here with a posse hunting us. A hint of admiration flickered in his eyes. You've got spine, Willa Hargrove. I'll give you that. She smiled, the first genuine smile in days. Necessity breeds courage, Mr. Miller. Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Yorick cleared his throat and stood. We should eat. Rest while we can. Tomorrow will come soon enough. As the afternoon faded into evening, they settled into an unexpectedly comfortable domesticity. Yorick prepared a simple stew from the cabin's provisions while Willa found bedding for a makeshift pallet on the floor. I'll take the floor, he insisted when she tried to offer him the bed. Been sleeping rough most of my life. You always give up your bed for virtual strangers. She asked, trying to lighten the mood. Only the ones being hunted by posses, he replied with the ghost of a smile. After they'd eaten, they sat before the fire, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the pines and rattling the cabin's single window. Storm coming, Yorick observed, glancing toward the darkening sky. Might work in our favor. Snow will cover our tracks. Is it safe to travel in a storm? Depends on how bad it gets. He added another log to the fire. In the morning, we'll see. Willa wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of their situation. I've dragged you into danger with me. I'm sorry for that. Yorick looked at her thoughtfully. No one dragged me anywhere, Willa. I chose this. Why? The question that had been burning inside her finally escaped. You could have looked the other way, most would have. He was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. 8 years ago, he began, his voice low, I was working a ranch in Kansas. Small place just outside a town called Bitter Creek. There was a woman there, a widow with Mexican blood, Carmela. His expression softened at the memory. She was a healer, used herbs, poultices, helped birth babies, ease pain. Willa listened intently, sensing this story wasn't one he told often. Banker's wife had a difficult birth. Baby came out wrong cord around its neck. Carmela did everything she could, but he shook his head. Banker couldn't accept that his son was gone, started saying Carmela had cursed the child, that she'd used witchcraft. A chill ran through Willa that had nothing to do with the coming storm. Town turned on her fast. I tried to help to get her away. His voice hardened. I was too late. They'd already dragged her from her home, hanged her from an old oak tree at the edge of town. "Oh, Yorick," Willa whispered, her hand involuntarily reaching for his. He looked down at their joined hands with surprise, then back to her face. "I couldn't save her. Couldn't even give her a proper burial. They ran me out of town at gunpoint." His fingers tightened around hers. "I swore I'd never stand by again, not if I could help it." The weight of his confession hung between them, his pain still raw despite the years. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For her, for you. Don't be sorry for me. I'm the one who failed." "You didn't fail, you tried." "That's more than most would do." He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing something beyond her physical presence. "You remind me of her sometimes, not in looks, but here," he touched his chest. "The way you face things, head on, no backing down." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. "I'm not sure that's wisdom or stubbornness. Bit of both, maybe." Something like tenderness crossed his features. "Gets a person through either way." They sat in silence for a while longer, hands still joined, the fire crackling softly in counterpoint to the rising wind outside. For the first time since the fever, Willa felt truly seen, not as a survivor, not as a suspected witch, but simply as herself. "We should sleep," Yorick said finally, reluctantly releasing her hand. "Long day tomorrow." As Willa settled into the cabin's narrow bed, she watched Yorick arrange his blankets on the floor nearby. In the firelight, his profile was strong and somber. A good man, she realized. Perhaps the best she'd ever known. "Good night, Yorick," she whispered. He glanced up, his eyes catching the firelight. "Sleep well, Willa." That night, as the storm wrapped the cabin in snow and wind, Willa dreamed not of fevers or accusations, but of open plains and endless sky, and a man who rode beside her toward a horizon full of promise. Morning brought a transformed world. 6 inches of fresh snow blanketed the ground, and more fell in gentle swirls from a pewter sky. The cabin's interior was cold except near the freshly stoked fire, where Yorick was brewing coffee. "Been up long?" Willa asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she joined him. "Couple hours." He handed her a steaming cup. "Storm's not letting up. We're staying put today." She sipped the strong coffee gratefully. "Will the posse still search in this weather?" "Not likely. Too dangerous in unfamiliar territory." He glanced out the window at the steadily falling snow. "Gives us a reprieve, at least." They spent the day in unexpected contentment, trapped together in the small cabin while the storm raged outside. Yorick repaired a loose shutter and tended to the horses in the lean-to. Willa took inventory of their supplies and prepared meals from the cabin's stores. Between tasks, they talked tentatively at first, then with growing ease. Yorick spoke of his years on the trail, the cattle drives and mining camps, the characters he'd met and places he'd seen. Willa told him about Boston, her family, her dreams of education that had brought her west to teach. "Do you miss it?" he asked as they sat before the fire that evening. "Teaching. Every day," she admitted. "The children were the heart of my life here, watching them learn, grow." She smiled sadly. "Now they're being taught I'm something to fear." "Children are more resilient than we give them credit for," Yorick said. "More discerning too, perhaps, but their parents are afraid of what they don't understand." He poked at the fire. "Fear's a powerful motivator." "So is hatred, true, but fear comes first, fear of disease, of death." He glanced at her. "You survived what killed others, makes you different. Different frightens people." "Is that why you've always kept moving?" she asked softly. "To avoid being different in one place too long?" He considered her question with surprising openness. "Maybe easier sometimes being a stranger, no expectations. Sounds lonely." "It is." His honesty touched her. "But familiar." "And now," she asked, "what's familiar about helping a suspected witch flee a posse?" A rare smile crossed his face, transforming his weathered features. Nothing. That's new territory entirely. Their laughter mingled, warm and genuine in the firelit cabin. Willa felt something shift between them, a deepening connection that transcended their circumstances. When they finally retired for the night, the storm still howling outside, she found herself reluctant to end their conversation. Lying in the darkness, listening to Yorick's steady breathing from his pallet on the floor, she realized with startling clarity that she was developing feelings for this quiet, honorable man. The thought should have alarmed her. Their situation was already complicated enough without adding romantic entanglements. Yet instead of anxiety, she felt only a gentle certainty, as if recognizing something that had been true for longer than she'd known. Morning brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that turned the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling wonderland. The storm had dropped nearly a foot of fresh powder, transforming the rugged terrain into smooth, undulating curves. Beautiful, Willa breathed, standing in the cabin doorway. And dangerous, Yorick added practically. Snow this deep slows travel, makes tracks obvious. Will we leave today? He shook his head. Too risky, snow needs to settle, melt some. Tomorrow maybe. Another day together then. The prospect pleased her more than it should have. They spent the morning in companionable work, Yorick clearing paths to the lean-to and chopping more firewood, Willa organizing their supplies for the journey ahead. By afternoon, the sun had softened the snow enough that they ventured a short distance from the cabin, assessing conditions for travel. East will be difficult, Yorick observed, scanning the snow-covered mountains. Passes might already be closed. South takes us back toward danger, Willa noted. West, then, or north? Wyoming's still an option, she nodded, considering. How far to the nearest town where we might not be recognized? 3 days' hard ride to Silver Creek. Mining town, mostly. Transient population. Could we stay there? Just until spring makes eastern travel safer, Yorick seemed to weigh the idea. Possibly, I know a few people there. Might find work. I could too, she said, surprising herself with her determination. I can cook, so keep accounts. You do that. Take on menial work after being a teacher. I'd do whatever necessary to survive, she replied simply. Wouldn't you? He looked at her with unmistakable admiration. Already the double meaning wasn't lost on her. This man had risked everything to help her, his job, his safety, perhaps his life. The realization humbled her. They walked back toward the cabin in comfortable silence, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Near the door, Willa's foot slipped on a patch of ice. Yorick caught her instantly, strong hands steadying her waist. Careful, he murmured, his face suddenly close to hers. Time seemed to suspend as they stood there, his hands warm through her coat, her eyes meeting his. Something changed in his expression, awareness, perhaps, or decision. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his face to hers. His lips were warm against her cold, flushed cheek, barely brushing the corner of her mouth. Not quite a kiss, but a question. Willa answered by turning her face slightly, bringing their lips fully together. The kiss was gentle, tentative, two people discovering each other amid circumstances neither would have chosen. His hand came up to cradle her face, rough calluses against her smooth skin. She leaned into him, finding solidity and warmth. When they parted, Yorick's eyes searched hers, uncertainty visible beneath his usual composure. I shouldn't have, yes, she interrupted softly. You should have. A smile broke across his face, not the ghost of one she'd seen before, but full and genuine, transforming him completely. He looked younger, unburdened for a moment from the weight of his solitary existence. Willa, he said, her name becoming something precious in his mouth. Yorick, she returned, matching his tone. They might have kissed again, but a distant sound froze them both, the faint but unmistakable baying of hounds. Yorick's expression hardened instantly. They've found our trail. Fear clutched at Willa's heart. How the snow must have picked it up from the cabin. They're more determined than I thought. He pulled her quickly inside. Pack only what's essential. We leave now. In this snow, you said it was too dangerous, more dangerous to stay. He was already gathering their supplies, movements efficient and precise. We'll head west through the ravine. Harder going, but they'll expect us to take the easier route north. Within minutes, they had the horses saddled and loaded with their meager possessions. The hound's baying was closer now, echoing ominously through the snow-hushed forest. "Stay close," Yorick instructed as they mounted. "Follow exactly where I lead. One wrong step in this snow could break a horse's leg." They set off at a careful pace, weaving through dense pine forest where the snow lay shallower beneath the evergreen canopy. Yorick led them along game trails and rocky outcroppings where their tracks would be less visible. For hours, they pushed westward, the terrain growing increasingly challenging. Steep slopes gave way to narrow ravines, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through treacherous passages. All the while, the distant sound of pursuit ebbed and flowed, sometimes seeming to fade, only to return with renewed clarity. By late afternoon, exhaustion was taking its toll. Willa's hands were numb despite her gloves, and Yorick's face was etched with fatigue and concern. "We need to find shelter soon," he said, scanning the darkening sky. Temperatures dropping fast. As if in confirmation, fat snowflakes began to fall, heralding another storm. Willa's heart sank. Being caught in the open during a mountain snowstorm could be fatal. "There," Yorick pointed to a dark shape ahead. "Cave entrance. Might give us cover for the night." The shallow cave proved just deep enough to shelter them and the horses from the worst of the weather. Yorick managed to start a small, smokeless fire using dry wood they'd carried from the cabin. The meager warmth was a blessing as the storm intensified outside, turning the world white once more. "Will it stop them?" Willa asked, huddled close to the fire. "The storm, for tonight at least." He offered her jerky and hardtack from their provisions. "Eat, keep your strength up." They ate in tense silence, both aware that their situation had grown more precarious. The cave provided temporary shelter, but they couldn't stay there long. Their supplies were limited and the weather was worsening. "What happens if they catch us?" She finally asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since they'd heard the hounds. Yorick's expression was grave. "They won't take us alive." "What does that mean?" "It means I have a pistol with 6 bullets. His eyes met hers, unflinching. "And I'll use them if necessary." The implication chilled her more than the mountain air. "You'd shoot them, if they gave me no choice." He stoked the small fire carefully. "But that's not what I meant." Understanding dawned slowly. "You'd shoot us, before letting them take us." He didn't answer immediately, his face shadowed in the firelight. "I've seen what mobs do, Willa, what they're capable of." His voice was low, haunted. "Some fates are worse than death." She wanted to argue, to insist there must be another way, but the memory of the hanging drawing on her window stopped her. The hatred in the townspeople's eyes, the dead crow on her doorstep. Would they really show mercy if they caught her? "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," she said finally. Yorick's hand found hers in the dim light, squeezing gently. "We'll outrun them, make it to Silver Creek." And then, one step at a time, he managed a small smile. "First, we survived tonight." The storm intensified as darkness fell completely, howling winds driving snow into drifts outside their shallow refuge. They huddled together for warmth, the horses standing stoically at the back of the cave. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of what morning might bring, Willa found herself drawing comfort from Yorick's solid presence beside her. "Tell me something good," she whispered, needing distraction from their precarious situation. "Something from before." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then his deep voice rumbled in the darkness. "When I was 10, my father took me and my brother fishing on the Mississippi. Summer day, hot as blazes, we had this old rowboat, leaked something terrible." A smile colored his words. "Caught more catfish than we could carry. Mother fried them up with cornmeal, best meal I ever had." The simple memory painted a picture of a life before loss, before solitude, a glimpse of the boy he'd been. "What about you?" he asked. "Something good?" Willa closed her eyes, reaching back for a memory untainted by recent events. "Christmas time in Boston. I was 12. Snow falling on Beacon Hill, gaslights glowing through the flakes. My father took us to see a Christmas carol performed at the theater. I'd never seen anything so magical." "You miss the city, sometimes. The libraries mostly, the books." She smiled in the darkness. "But I've never regretted coming west, even now." His arm tightened around her shoulders. Even now, even now." She turned slightly to see his face in the dying firelight. "If I hadn't, I wouldn't have met you." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Yorick's expression softened, and he reached up to touch her cheek with gentle fingers. "Willa Hargrove," he said softly. "You are the bravest woman I've ever known." "Not brave," she corrected. "Just stubborn." "Both," he insisted, and kissed her. Unlike their first kiss outside the cabin, this one held nothing back. It was warm and deep and full of unspoken promises. His arms encircled her completely, drawing her against his solid warmth. She wound her fingers into his hair, letting herself be consumed by the sensation of his mouth on hers, his hands strong and sure against her back. When they finally parted, both breathless, the world outside seemed to have receded, the storm, the pursuit, the danger all momentarily forgotten in the discovery of each other. "I never expected you," Yorick murmured against her hair. "Never expected any of this." "Nor I," she admitted. "But I'm grateful for it. For you." They held each other through the long, cold night, the small fire burning down to embers as the storm gradually subsided. Despite their circumstances, despite the uncertainty of the future, Willa felt a peace she hadn't known in months. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Dawn broke clear and brilliantly cold, the storm having moved on during the night. Fresh snow blanketed the landscape, pristine and unmarked in the early light. "No tracks," Yorick observed as they carefully emerged from the cave. "Good sign." They ate a sparse breakfast and watered the horses at a partially frozen stream nearby. The animals were restless after the confined night, eager to move. "How far to Silver Creek?" Willa asked as they prepared to depart. 2 days if the weather holds." Yorick studied the western horizon. "Terrain gets easier once we're out of these mountains." They rode cautiously through the morning, Yorick constantly scanning for signs of pursuit. By midday, they had descended enough that the snow was patchy rather than deep, making travel easier but leaving more visible tracks. Yorick led them through rocky areas whenever possible, minimizing the trail they left behind. "Listen," he said suddenly, reining in his horse. Willa halted beside him, straining to hear whatever had caught his attention. At first she heard nothing but the wind in the pines and the occasional call of a jay, then, faintly, the distant thunder of hoofbeats. "Riders," Yorick confirmed grimly. "Coming fast," her heart lurched. "The posse, most likely." He quickly surveyed their surroundings. "There's a ridge ahead. If we can make it over before they spot us, we might lose them in the valley beyond." They urged their tired horses forward, climbing steadily toward the rocky ridge that offered their best chance of escape. The sound of pursuit grew steadily louder, multiple riders, moving rapidly despite the difficult terrain. Just as they crested the ridge, a shout rang out behind them. Willa looked back to see 5 riders emerging from the tree line below, pointing in their direction. "They've spotted us," she cried. "Ride," Yorick commanded, spurring his horse down the slope beyond the ridge. "Don't look back." They plunged down the steep hillside, horses slipping on loose shale and patches of snow. Behind them, the posse followed, their shouts carrying on the cold air. The valley below offered less cover than Yorick had hoped. Scattered pines and bare branched aspens provided minimal concealment as they galloped across the open ground, heading for denser forest on the far side. A shot rang out, the bullet whining past them to thud into a tree trunk. "Keep going." Yorick called, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Don't stop." He turned in his saddle, firing a shot toward their pursuers, not aiming to hit, but to slow them down. The posse scattered momentarily, providing precious seconds as Willa and Yorick reached the tree line. The forest provided better cover but slowed their pace. They weaved through the dense pines, branches whipping at their faces and tearing at their clothing. Behind them, the posse had regrouped and was closing the distance. "There's a river ahead," Yorick shouted over the thunder of hooves. "If we can cross it." Another shot rang out, closer this time. Willa's horse reared in panic, nearly unseating her. She clung to the saddle horn, fighting to control the frightened animal. "Yorick," she cried as the mare bolted sideways, crashing through underbrush. He wheeled his mount around, racing to intercept her runaway horse. Just as he reached her side, another shot cracked through the forest. Yorick jerked in the saddle, his face contorting in pain. "You're hit," Willa gasped, seeing the dark stain spreading on his left shoulder. "Keep moving," he gritted out, regaining control of his horse. Rivers just ahead. They broke from the forest onto the riverbank. The water rushed dark and cold between ice-rimmed shores, perhaps 30 feet across at its narrowest point. Can the horses make it? Willa asked, eyeing the swift current doubtfully. No choice. Yorick's face was pale beneath his tan, but his eyes remained clear and determined. Follow me, stay upstream of my crossing. He urged his horse into the frigid water. The animal balked initially, then plunged forward. Willa followed, gasping as icy water splashed up, soaking her legs and skirts. Her mare struggled against the current, snorting with fear but pushing steadily forward. Behind them, the posse had reached the riverbank. More shots rang out, sending up sprays of water around them. Willa ducked low over her horse's neck, praying for the animal's strength to hold. Midway across, Yorick's horse stumbled on the rocky riverbed, nearly going under. He clung to the saddle with his good arm, blood now visibly soaking his coat sleeve. Keep coming. He called to Willa, his voice strained but steady. The far shore seemed impossibly distant as the current pushed at her horse's legs. Cold seeped through her clothing, numbing her fingers on the reins. Behind them, 2 members of the posse had entered the water, attempting their own crossing. With a final surge of effort, Yorick's horse scrambled onto the opposite bank. He turned immediately, drawing his pistol and firing toward the pursuing riders. They retreated back toward the shore, unwilling to face his accurate fire while vulnerable in the water. Moments later, Willa's mare lurched onto solid ground, trembling with exhaustion. Yorick holstered his pistol and immediately spurred his horse forward. They'll find another crossing, he said, voice tight with pain. We need distance. They rode hard through the afternoon, pushing their exhausted mounts as much as they dared. Yorick's wound continued to bleed, his complexion growing ashen as the hours passed. Despite his protests, Willa insisted they stop in a sheltered grove to bind his injury. Bullet went clean through, he said as she cut away his blood-soaked shirt. Lucky. Lucky would be not getting shot at all, she retorted, working quickly to clean and bandage the wound with strips torn from her petticoat. This needs proper treatment. Silver Creek, he reminded her, wincing as she tightened the bandage. Doctor there, if we make it. She helped him back into his coat, worry evident in her face. Can you ride? Have to. He managed a ghost of his smile, not leaving you out here alone. They continued westward, pace slowed by Yorick's injury and the failing strength of their horses. As dusk approached, Willa spotted smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. A homestead, she said, hope rising. Perhaps they'll help us. Yorick looked doubtful. Risky. Could be sympathetic to the posse. You need shelter, she insisted. Proper care for that wound. We have to chance it. Too weak to argue further, he nodded reluctantly. The small farmhouse stood in a cleared area surrounded by cultivated fields now dormant for winter. A barn and corral stood nearby, with a few cattle visible in a sheltered pasture. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. That's far enough, he called, raising the weapon cautiously. State your business. Willa raised her hands to show they carried no weapons. Please, we need help. My husband is injured. The man, middle-aged, with a thick beard and suspicious eyes, squinted at them. What happened to him? Hunting accident, she lied smoothly. We're traveling to Silver Creek where his brother lives, got separated from our party in the storm. The man lowered his rifle slightly, eyes shifting to Yorick's blood-stained coat. After a moment's consideration, he called over his shoulder. Martha, visitors needing help. A woman appeared in the farmhouse doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. After a brief consultation with her husband, she beckoned them forward. Bring him inside, she called. I'll heat water. Relief flooded through Willa as they dismounted. Yorick swayed dangerously as his feet hit the ground, and she quickly moved to support him. Thank you, she said to the farmer as he helped her guide Yorick toward the house. We're grateful for your kindness. Jakob Nielsen, the man introduced himself gruffly. That's my wife Martha. We don't turn away folks in need, even strangers. Inside, the farmhouse was simple but immaculately kept. A fire blazed in the hearth, and the smell of cooking filled the warm air. Martha Nielsen, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and graying hair, directed them to a small bedroom off the main living area. Get him on the bed, she instructed, already rolling up her sleeves. I've tended many a wound in my time. With gentle efficiency, she helped remove Yorick's coat and shirt, examining the makeshift bandage Willa had applied. Clean through the meat of the shoulder, she pronounced after inspection. No bone or major vessels hit by the grace of God. He's lost blood, but he'll mend with proper care. While Martha cleaned and properly dressed the wound, Jakob brought in their saddlebags and tended to their exhausted horses. Willa assisted where she could, trying to ignore the gnawing worry that the posse might track them to this isolated farmhouse. You said hunting accident. Martha asked quietly as she worked, her tone suggesting she didn't quite believe the story. Willa hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. These people had opened their home to strangers. They deserved honesty, but the truth might endanger them. It's complicated, she finally said. Martha's eyes, shrewd and knowing, studied her face. Usually is. She finished bandaging Yorick's shoulder. He needs rest now, and you look dead on your feet yourself, child. I can't impose nonsense. We've room enough, and it's Christian charity to help travelers. She stood, gathering the bloodied cloths. Jakob will want to know if there's trouble following you, though, for all our sakes. Willa nodded, understanding the implied question. There may be men looking for us, she admitted carefully, but we've committed no crime. Martha seemed to weigh this information. Jakob was Norwegian by birth, came here with nothing but hope and hard work, knows something about being judged unfairly. She patted Willa's hand. Rest now. We'll talk more when your man's awake. Left alone with the sleeping Yorick, Willa sank into a chair beside the bed, exhaustion washing over her in waves. His face was peaceful in sleep, the lines of worry and vigilance temporarily smoothed away. She reached out to brush a strand of hair from his forehead, marveling at how quickly this man had become essential to her existence. Rest, she whispered, echoing Martha's instruction. I'll keep watch now. Later that evening, after Yorick had awakened and taken some broth, they sat at the Nielsen's table and told their story, not all of it, but enough. The fever, the town's suspicions, the hasty flight. Superstitious nonsense, Jakob pronounced when they'd finished. Seen it before. Fear makes men into fools and worse. You believe us? Willa asked, hardly daring to hope. Why wouldn't we? Martha replied simply. Surviving illness isn't witchcraft, it's God's mercy. Jakob nodded agreement. You can stay until he's fit to travel. We're isolated here, few visitors, especially in winter. We couldn't impose, Yorick began, but the farmer cut him off. Not imposing if you're invited. Besides, spring planting's coming. Could use an extra hand, even a wounded one, once you're stronger. The offer, so unexpected, so generous, brought tears to Willa's eyes. Thank you, she managed, both of you. That night, given a small but comfortable room to share, the Nielsens having accepted without question their claim to be married, Willa and Yorick held each other close in the narrow bed, his injured arm carefully positioned. Good people, Yorick murmured against her hair. Rare to find. Do you think we're safe here? She asked, the day's fears still echoing in her mind. For now, his good arm tightened around her, but we can't stay forever. Eventually we'll need to move on. I know. She traced his jawline with gentle fingers, but for tonight, let's just be grateful. I am grateful, he said, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. For them, for you, for me, for giving me something I'd forgotten existed. His eyes, silvery in the moonlight filtering through the small window, held hers. Hope. The word hung between them, fragile and precious. In the midst of danger, of uncertainty, they had found not just safety, but possibility. A future neither had dared imagine just days before. I love you, Willa Hargrove, Yorick said simply, the words falling naturally from his lips as if he'd been saying them all his life. Whatever comes next, whatever road we take, I love you. Joy burst within her, bright and overwhelming. And I love you, Yorick Miller, with everything I am. Their kiss sealed the declaration tender, despite the passion simmering beneath, mindful of his injury yet unwilling to hold back the emotion that had grown between them. In that moment, despite everything, Willa knew they had already found the most precious thing two people could share. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The days at the Nielsen farm passed with surprising tranquility. Yorick's wound began to heal cleanly, his strength returning gradually. Willa helped Martha with household tasks, grateful for the older woman's quiet companionship and practical wisdom. Jakob, though gruff in manner, proved a generous host. He showed Yorick around the small farm when he was well enough to walk, explaining his methods for surviving the harsh mountain winters and coaxing crops from the sometimes unforgiving soil. Land's got memories, the Norwegian farmer told them one evening as they sat before the fire. Remembers who respects it, who works with it instead of against it. It was a philosophy that resonated with Yorick, who had spent his life reading the land, understanding its moods and messages. He and Jakob developed a rapport based on this shared understanding, despite their different backgrounds. A week into their stay, as Willa helped Martha preserve the last of the fall apples, the older woman broached the subject they'd all been carefully avoiding. "The men who are hunting you," she began, hands steady as she sliced fruit, "they won't give up easily, I think." Willa's knife paused mid-cut. "Probably not." "Jakob rode to town yesterday," Martha continued. "Heard talk of a posse looking for a woman suspected of witchcraft and the man who helped her escape, offering a reward." Cold fear washed through Willa. "I'm so sorry. We've brought danger to your door." "Hush, child, we're not afraid." Martha's eyes, kind but resolute, met hers. "But you should know they're still searching. And Silver Creek might not be safe either." Word spreads between towns. "What should we do?" Willa asked, the brief sense of security they'd found crumbling around her. Martha considered, her weathered hands continuing their work. "Jakob has family in Oregon. His brother settled near Portland years ago. Good land there, I hear, growing community." Willa understood the implied suggestion. Oregon is very far, yes, far from Colorado and its superstitions. Martha placed a comforting hand over Willa's. "Just something to consider." That night, Willa shared this conversation with Yorick as they lay in their small room, his arm now strong enough to hold her properly. "Oregon," he mused, considering the possibility, "never been that far west." "It's just an idea," Willa said. "We could still try Silver Creek first, see if it's safe." Martha's right word travels. "If there's a reward." He sighed, his breath warm against her hair. "Oregon might be our best chance for a fresh start, true fresh start." "It's so far," she repeated, the enormity of such a journey overwhelming in the darkness. "Winter travel would be dangerous." "We'd wait for spring," he replied, working through the logistics aloud. "Could earn our keep here through winter if the Nielsen's are willing. Save what we can for the journey." The plan was taking shape between them, tentative but increasingly real. A new life, far from the shadows of suspicion and fear, together. "Would you mind?" she asked softly. "Settling in one place after so many years of wandering." He was quiet for a long moment, his hand stroking gently along her arm. "There was a time when the thought of putting down roots terrified me," he finally admitted. "Felt like being trapped. And now I think," he shifted to see her face in the moonlight, "I think home isn't a place. It's a person." His eyes, so often guarded, were completely open to her now. "You're my home, Willa. Wherever you are, that's where I want to be." The simple declaration moved her deeply. This man, who had spent his adult life avoiding attachment, was offering her not just his heart but his future. The gift humbled her. "Then we'll go to Oregon," she decided, reaching up to touch his beloved face. Together. His smile in the darkness was worth every hardship they had endured, every uncertainty still ahead. "Together," he agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss. The following morning, they presented their plan to the Nielsens. Jakob nodded thoughtfully as Yorick outlined their hope to work through winter in exchange for shelter, then journey to Oregon in spring. "Good plan," the farmer approved. "Always need help around a farm, especially with my joints getting creakier each year." He glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragement. "Could use Martha's help too, if you're willing," he added to Willa. "She tries to do too much herself." "I'd be honored," Willa replied sincerely. "One more thing," Yorick added, his hand finding Willa's. "Before we begin this arrangement, we'd like to be married, properly." He glanced at her, seeking confirmation. "If there's a minister who could perform the ceremony discreetly." Willa's heart swelled at the unexpected proposal. They had been living as husband and wife in the Nielsen's home, but the idea of making their union official, of truly belonging to each other before God and witnesses, filled her with joy. Martha beamed at them. Pastor Erickson at the Norwegian church in the valley. He's a good man, doesn't gossip. Jakob can ride over tomorrow to speak with him. And so, 3 days later, Willa found herself in the small, wooden church 10 miles from the Nielsen farm, wearing a dress borrowed from Martha and wildflowers in her hair. Jakob and Martha stood as witnesses, along with Pastor Erickson's wife, as Yorick, handsome despite his still healing wound, promised to love, honor, and protect her all the days of his life. I, Yorick James Miller, take thee, Willa Elizabeth Hargrove, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he vowed, his voice steady and sure as he slipped a simple gold band purchased from Jakob, who had carried it as emergency currency since his immigration, onto her finger. When she repeated her own vows, pledging herself to him for better or worse, in sickness and in health, she felt as though her heart might burst with the fullness of her love for this man who had risked everything to stand beside her. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder, Pastor Erickson pronounced, his Norwegian accent adding gravity to the ancient words. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Yorick's kiss was gentle yet possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. As they signed the marriage certificate, using their real names, a defiant act of honesty in a world that had forced them into hiding, Willa felt a profound sense of rightness. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as one. Winter descended on the mountain farm with breathtaking swiftness. November brought heavy snows that isolated them from the nearest town, creating a peaceful cocoon around the small homestead. Days fell into a pleasant rhythm, the men tending livestock and making repairs, the women managing the household and preserving food stores for the months ahead. Nights belonged to Willa and Yorick alone, in their small room with its feather bed and wood stove. There, they explored each other fully, their passion tempered by tenderness, their bodies learning the language only lovers speak. In Yorick's arms, Willa discovered depths of feeling she had never imagined possible, while he found, at last, the sense of belonging that had eluded him throughout his solitary life. I never thought I'd have this, he confessed one night as they lay entwined, fire crackling in the small stove. A wife, a home, even a temporary one, she reminded him, thinking of their plans to leave in spring. It's not the place that makes it home. His arms tightened around her. It's you. As December turned to January, and January to February, their determination to journey to Oregon never wavered, but they found unexpected contentment in their temporary refuge. The Nielsens had become like family, their acceptance and support a healing balm after the rejection Willa had faced in Whispering Pines. One crisp February morning, as Willa helped Martha prepare breakfast, a wave of nausea swept over her without warning. She gripped the edge of the table, breathing deeply until the sensation passed. Martha's knowing eyes missed nothing. How long? She asked quietly. How long what? Willa replied, though something in her already suspected the answer. Since your monthly courses. Willa calculated quickly, realization dawning. 6 weeks, maybe 7. She looked up at Martha, wonder and apprehension mingling in her expression. Do you think? The older woman smiled gently. I've seen it enough times to recognize the signs. You're carrying a child, my dear. A child. Yorick's child. The thought filled her with such joy she thought her heart might burst from it. Yet with the joy came fear for the dangerous journey ahead, fear for the uncertainty of their future. The trip to Oregon. She began. Many women have made longer journeys while with child, Martha reassured her. You're strong and healthy, and that husband of yours would move mountains to keep you safe. That evening, after the men had returned from repairing a damaged section of the barn roof, Willa drew Yorick outside despite the cold. Snowflakes drifted lazily in the still air as she led him to the small bench Jakob had built beside the farmhouse door. Is something wrong? He asked, concern evident in his face as they sat together. No, she assured him, taking his hands in hers. Something is very right. She took a deep breath, watching his beloved face carefully. Yorick, I'm going to have a baby, our baby. For a moment he seemed frozen, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, tears filled his eyes, this man who had faced danger unflinchingly, who had weathered hardship without complaint. A baby, he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. One hand moved tentatively to her still flat stomach. Our child. Are you happy? She asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. In response, he drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, he murmured against her hair. Terrified, overwhelmed, grateful beyond words, she laughed softly, her own tears mingling with his. Those are my feelings exactly. He pulled back to look at her, his expression suddenly serious. The journey to Oregon will be more challenging, she acknowledged, but not impossible. Martha says women have made such trips before. We'll take it slower, he decided. Stop more often, maybe find a wagon train for safety. His protective instincts were fully engaged now, planning, strategizing for their expanded family. I won't let anything happen to either of you. I know. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. We'll make it work together. They sat in the gentle snowfall a while longer, dreaming aloud of the life they would build in Oregon, a small farm perhaps. Or maybe Yorick would find work on a ranch while Willa could teach again once the baby was older. Simple dreams, but precious in their newfound possibility. When they finally returned inside to share their news with the Nielsen's, they were met with genuine delight and immediate practical support. Martha began setting aside fabric for baby clothes, while Jakob insisted they take one of the farm's sturdy wagons for their journey west. Been meaning to get a new one anyway, he claimed, though Willa suspected this was a generous fiction. As winter began its slow retreat and the first signs of spring appeared on the mountainside, preparations for their departure intensified. Jakob helped Yorick reinforce the wagon and select the best horses from his small herd. Martha taught Willa everything she knew about childcare and herbal remedies that might be useful on the trail. They planned to leave in early April, when the mountain passes would be clear, but before Willa's pregnancy advanced too far. The journey would take months, but if all went well, they would reach Oregon before the baby arrived in late summer. March brought unexpected news when Jakob returned from a rare trip to town with a newspaper from Denver. Thought you might want to see this, he said, handing the paper to Yorick. A small article on the third page caught their attention immediately. Fever claims more victims in southern Colorado. The mysterious illness known locally as the red fever has struck again, this time in the mining community of Black Canyon. 5 deaths reported with similar symptoms to the outbreak in Whispering Pines last autumn. Medical authorities are investigating the possible source. It's spreading, Willa said quietly, reading over Yorick's shoulder. Just like before. This proves it wasn't your doing, Yorick pointed out. You're hundreds of miles away. Logic rarely convinces those determined to find supernatural causes, she replied, though the news did provide a certain vindication. But perhaps eventually they'll understand. As their departure date approached, Willa found herself experiencing a mixture of excitement and sorrow. The Nielsen's had become dear to them, their farm a haven of acceptance and kindness in a world that had shown them its darkest side. We can never repay you, she told Martha the night before they were to leave, helping the older woman prepare a final meal together. Nonsense, Martha replied briskly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. You've brought life to this old place. Reminded us what it's like to have family around. You'll write to us, Willa asked. When we're settled, we'll send our address. Of course. And maybe someday, when that little one is older, you'll come visit. Martha smiled, patting Willa's slightly rounded stomach. Journey's not so impossible once you've done it once. The idea of returning someday, of introducing their child to the people who had made their new life possible, comforted Willa, as they said their goodbyes the following morning. Jakob, not given to emotional displays, gruffly pressed a Bible into Yorick's hands, a parting gift to guide their journey. Martha hugged them both fiercely, slipping a packet of seeds into Willa's basket for your garden in Oregon, she explained. As their wagon pulled away from the farm that had sheltered them through winter, Willa and Yorick looked back one last time at the couple standing hand in hand before their modest home. These good people had restored their faith in humanity when it had been most severely tested. We'll see them again, Yorick said with conviction, his arms secure around Willa's shoulders as he guided the horses forward. "When our child is old enough to travel." "Yes," she agreed, leaning into his strength. "We will." The journey west was as challenging as they had anticipated, yet filled with unexpected beauty and moments of profound connection. They traveled alone rather than joining a wagon train, preferring the freedom to set their own pace as Willa's pregnancy progressed. By June, they had crossed into Idaho territory, the mountains giving way to rolling hills and eventually the vast plains. Willa's body had changed dramatically, her belly now a proud curve beneath her loose dresses. Yorick watched these changes with wonder and devotion, his protective instincts intensifying with each passing mile. They avoided settlements when possible, camping in secluded spots away from established trails. When supplies necessitated visits to towns, Yorick went alone while Willa remained with the wagon. The posse from Whispering Pines was far behind them now, but caution had become second nature. One warm evening in late July, as they made camp beside a clear stream in eastern Oregon, Willa felt the first unmistakable movements of their child, not the fluttering sensations she'd experienced for weeks, but definite kicks against her hand as she rested it on her rounded abdomen. "Yorick," she called softly, "come quickly." He was at her side instantly, concern giving way to awe as she guided his hand to the spot where their baby announced its presence. "That's our child," he whispered, eyes wide with wonder as he felt the strong movements beneath his palm. "Strong like its mother, and stubborn like its father," she teased gently. His answering smile was full of love and anticipation. "Not much further now, another few weeks and we'll reach the Willamette Valley." They made Portland by mid-August, just as Willa entered her final month of pregnancy. The growing city on the Columbia River welcomed them anonymously, two more settlers among the many arriving daily from all parts of the country. With their carefully saved money, they secured a small rental cottage on the city's outskirts while Yorick found work at a local livery stable. "Temporary," he assured Willa as they settled into their modest home. "Just until after the baby comes, then we'll look for land of our own." The baby, however, had plans of her own. Barely a week after their arrival in Portland, Willa woke in the pre-dawn hours to the unmistakable sensations of labor beginning. "It's time," she told Yorick calmly, though her heart raced with both excitement and trepidation. His response was anything but calm. He nearly upended their small table in his haste to fetch the midwife they had arranged to call upon when the time came. The woman Mrs. Abernathy, a no-nonsense widow with 30 years' experience bringing new lives into the world, arrived promptly, taking charge of the situation with brisk efficiency. "First babies often take their time," she informed Yorick as she shooed him from the bedroom. "Make yourself useful chopping wood or fetching water. This could be a long day." But their daughter, like her parents, defied expectations. "After just 6 hours of labor, quickest first birth I've ever attended, Mrs. Abernathy declared." Willa delivered a healthy, strong-lunged girl with a dusting of dark hair and her father's storm-gray eyes. When Yorick was finally allowed into the bedroom, he approached the bed, where Willa cradled their newborn with reverence bordering on awe. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out to touch the tiny face peering up at him from within her swaddling. "She's perfect," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "You both are." Willa smiled tiredly, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such joy. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" The look of terror that crossed his face almost made her laugh. "I might break her," he protested, even as his arms instinctively reached for the bundle. "You won't," she assured him, carefully transferring their child to his strong hands. The sight of this man who had faced passes and blizzards without flinching, holding their tiny daughter with such tender care, brought tears to Willa's eyes. He gazed down at the infant with naked adoration, all his usual stoicism dissolved by the miracle in his arms. "What shall we call her?" he asked softly, not taking his eyes from their child's face. Willa had been considering names throughout her pregnancy, but now, seeing them together, only one seemed right. "Margaret," she suggested, "after my sister, Margaret Martha Miller." Yorick tested the name, speaking it softly to the infant who gazed up at him with unfocused eyes. Margaret Martha Miller, he repeated, strong name for a strong girl. He looked up at Willa, his expression solemn, but we'll call her Maggie, a bit of brightness to balance the formality. Maggie, Willa agreed, loving the way his face softened when he spoke it. Perfect. In the days that followed, they settled into the rhythm of new parenthood, exhausting, exhilarating, and utterly transformative. Yorick proved an attentive father, rising in the night to bring Maggie to Willa for feeding, changing the infant with increasing confidence, walking the floor with her when she was fussy. Never thought I'd see the day, Mrs. Abernathy commented during a checkup visit a week after the birth. Most men can't be bothered with the messy business of babies. Most men are fools then, Yorick replied simply, not looking up from where he was carefully swaddling Maggie. By October, with Willa fully recovered and Maggie thriving, they began to look toward their future more permanently. Yorick's work at the livery had introduced him to local ranchers and farmers, providing connections that would prove valuable in establishing their own place. There's land available south of here, he told Willa one evening as they sat before their small hearth, Maggie sleeping contentedly in her cradle nearby. Good soil, water rights, fair price, about 30 acres enough to start with. Willa considered the possibility, excitement building. Our own farm, if you want it. His eyes searched hers. Or we could stay in town, you could teach again eventually. I do miss teaching, she admitted, but a farm of our own. The idea appealed deeply, independence, self-sufficiency, a legacy for their daughter. Could we manage both somehow? A small farm, but close enough to a settlement that I might teach once Maggie's older, Yorick smiled, clearly pleased by her enthusiasm. There's a growing community about 2 miles from the property. Nothing fancy, but they'll need a school soon enough. The decision made itself. By November, they had purchased the land and begun constructing a modest home with the help of neighbors. The frontier tradition of barn raising extended to their small house. By Christmas, they had moved into their own place, simple but sound, with room to grow as their family expanded. That first Christmas in their new home, with Maggie now 4 months old and full of personality, they celebrated with a quiet joy neither had dared hope for when they'd fled Colorado the previous winter. Yorick had crafted a small rocking horse for Maggie's future enjoyment, while Willa had sewn him a new shirt from fabric she'd carefully saved for the occasion. I have something for you too, he told her after they'd exchanged these gifts, reaching into his pocket. The small package contained a locket silver, simply designed but beautiful in its craftsmanship. Inside, he had somehow managed to place a tiny lock of Maggie's dark hair. It's beautiful, Willa whispered, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. Open the back, he instructed softly. She turned the locket over, finding a delicate engraving on the reverse side. For my heart, my home, my haven. Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at the man who had risked everything to stand beside her, who had transformed from lonely wanderer to devoted husband and father. I love you, Yorick Miller, more than I have words to express. And I love you, Willa Miller, he replied, using her married name with evident satisfaction. Today and all our tomorrows. As they sat before their fire, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From accusation and fear to acceptance and love, from isolation to family, from running to, at last, coming home. They had named their small farm haven a fitting tribute to what they had created together. A safe harbor after the storm. A place of belonging, outside, snow began to fall gently on their new land, not the threatening blizzard of their escape, but a peaceful blanket promising renewal in spring. Within their walls, warmth and love created a different kind of shelter, one built not of timber and nails but of devotion and hope. Once they had been fugitives, hunted and afraid. Now they were settlers, putting down roots that would grow deeper with each passing season. The witch and her defender had become simply a family ordinary in the eyes of their new community, extraordinary to each other. As Yorick drew her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the years still to come, Willa knew with absolute certainty that they had found something far more precious than mere survival. They had found redemption, purpose, and a love powerful enough to overcome the darkest superstition. They had found their haven together.